A simmering dispute between the US and Canada has erupted, threatening the land bridge connecting the lower 48 to Alaska. The conflict centers on transportation corridors through British Columbia, vital for Alaskan goods and industries. For decades, these routes symbolized cooperation, but now they're a pressure point in a growing trade war. Alaska's dependence on Canadian highways has become a vulnerability, with both sides exploiting it for leverage. The dispute is more than a regional squabble. It's a sign of fracturing alliances in an era of nationalism and protectionism. The outcome will impact Alaskans, British Columbians, and the broader US-Canada trade relationship. As tensions mount, the world watches to see if these allies can avoid turning their border into a new front in a global trade war. President Trump's threat of a sweeping 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican goods shocked Ottawa and set the stage for retaliation. His aggressive rhetoric, branding Canada as a gatekeeper, turned a trade dispute into a matter of national pride and sovereignty. The tariff threat gave British Columbia political cover to consider tolls on the Alaska Highway. An unthinkable move before. Trump's gambit meant to pressure Canada, instead handed them a powerful reason to strike back at Alaska's unique vulnerability. The stage was set for a dramatic escalation, with both sides ready to weaponize their geographic advantages. British Columbia Premier David Eby found himself at the center of a growing trade dispute, one that threatened to disrupt the delicate balance between Canada and the United States. As tensions mounted over new US tariffs, Eby was under pressure to defend his province's interests and protect its economic stability. In a bold move, Eby introduced legislation that would allow British Columbia to impose tolls on commercial vehicles traveling north to Alaska. These trucks, often carrying vital goods and supplies, are the lifeline for Alaska, which relies on Canadian highways for much of its overland trade. The Economic Stabilization, Tariff Response Act as it was called, granted the province sweeping authority to levy fees on trucks using its highways and ferries. This legislation was crafted to be nimble, giving the government the power to respond quickly if the trade situation worsened. Premier Eby emphasized that this was not an act of hostility but rather a reluctant yet necessary measure to shield BC's economy from external threats. He described the move as a defensive action, taken only after careful consideration and in response to mounting US pressure. The bill's design allows for flexibility. Tolls can be activated or increased if US tariffs escalate, making it a powerful bargaining chip in ongoing negotiations. This adaptability ensures that BC can respond proportionally to any future developments. With existing way stations and toll booth infrastructure already in place, the province could implement these fees almost overnight. This readiness sends a clear message. BC is prepared to act if necessary, and the threat is not an empty one. By targeting the critical supply route to Alaska, the province localizes a national dispute, turning the highways into a strategic pressure point. The move is calculated to hit where it hurts, leveraging geography to counteract US economic measures. By preparing to charge for passage, BC asserts its control over the land corridor that the US must cross to keep Alaska supplied. This assertion of sovereignty is both a practical and symbolic gesture, reinforcing the province's role in the broader geopolitical landscape. The highways of Western Canada, once just ribbons of asphalt through vast wilderness, have now become a geopolitical chessboard. Every truck, every border crossing, is a potential move in a high-stakes game that could impact thousands of businesses and families on both sides of the border. The threat of tolls marks a significant escalation, transforming what was once routine logistics into a matter of international diplomacy. As both sides weigh their next steps, the world watches to see how this standoff will reshape the flow of goods and the future of cross-border relations. The prospect of tolls on the Alaska Highway threatens the state's lifeline for perishable goods and urgent industrial supplies. While most cargo arrives by sea, trucking is critical for fresh food and vital equipment. Higher transportation costs would hit Alaskan consumers and industries hard, risking shortages and price spikes. The Alaska Trucking Association warns that tolls could disrupt supply chains, force companies out of business, and leave remote communities vulnerable. For Alaskans, the dispute is no longer abstract. Daily necessities now hang in the balance, caught in a political crossfire. Alaska's leaders responded swiftly, revealing deep anxiety over the state's dependence on Canadian goodwill. The recent events have shaken the very foundation of the state's economic and social stability. The reliance on Canadian routes for essential supplies has always been a point of vulnerability, but now it has become a glaring issue that demands immediate attention. Governor Mike Dunleavy urged de-escalation and called for federal negotiations, hoping to avoid further conflict. He emphasized the importance of maintaining a peaceful and cooperative relationship with Canada, stressing that any escalation could have dire consequences for both sides. Dunleavy's approach is rooted in diplomacy, aiming to find a solution that would benefit all parties involved. In contrast, Senator Dan Sullivan threatened direct economic retaliation, vowing to target British Columbia's tourism industry. His stance is more aggressive, reflecting a frustration with the current situation and a desire to take immediate action. Sullivan's proposal is seen as a way to pressure Canada into negotiations by hitting them where it hurts economically. Sullivan proposed waiving the Passenger Vessel Services Act, allowing cruise ships to bypass Canadian ports and devastating BC's tourism sector. This move, if implemented, could significantly impact the Canadian economy, particularly in regions heavily dependent on tourism. It's a bold strategy that underscores the high stakes of the current conflict. The split between diplomacy and confrontation highlights Alaska's impossible position, caught between preserving cooperation and fighting back. The state's leaders are divided on the best course of action, reflecting the broader uncertainty and tension within the community. This division is emblematic of the larger struggle to balance immediate needs with long-term relationships. Both leaders' responses stem from the same fear, a looming threat to Alaska's supply chain and economic stability. The potential disruption of goods and services is a critical concern, as it could lead to shortages and increased prices for essential items. This fear is driving the urgency behind the state's response, as leaders seek to protect their constituents from the fallout of the conflict. The state is pleading for resolution but preparing for a drawn-out conflict. Community meetings and government sessions are filled with anxious discussions about the future. Alaskans are bracing for the worst while hoping for the best, understanding that the path to resolution may be long and fraught with challenges. Alaska's political island is now the front line in a much larger trade war. The state's unique geographical position has always been a strategic point, but now it's a battleground for economic and political power. The outcome of this conflict could set a precedent for future international relations and trade policies. The stakes for the state's future have never been higher. Families and businesses alike are on edge, watching closely as their leaders navigate this complex and high-stakes situation. The decisions made in the coming days and weeks will shape the future of Alaska for years to come. At the heart of Alaska's counter-threat is the cruise ship industry, a major economic engine for both Alaska and British Columbia. Every summer, these massive floating hotels bring hundreds of thousands of tourists to the region, fueling local economies and supporting countless jobs. The stakes are enormous. For many small businesses, restaurants, and tour operators, the arrival of cruise ships marks the difference between a thriving season and a struggle to survive. Waiving the Passenger Vessel Services Act would let foreign-flagged cruise ships sail directly from Seattle to Alaska, bypassing Canadian ports entirely. This legal maneuver, if made permanent, would fundamentally alter the established routes that have long benefited British Columbia's port cities. It's a move that would shift the flow of tourism dollars, jobs, and opportunities northward, leaving Canadian communities in the lurch. This move would devastate BC's tourism sector, which relies on millions of cruise passengers each summer. Local businesses, from souvenir shops to hotels and tour guides, depend on the steady stream of visitors. Without these ships stopping in Canadian ports, the ripple effects would be felt far beyond the waterfront, impacting families and entire communities. There's precedent. During the pandemic, Congress temporarily waived the law to save Alaska's cruise season. That emergency measure offered a glimpse of what a future without Canadian port stops could look like. Empty terminals, shuttered businesses, and a dramatic shift in regional tourism patterns. The memory of that season still lingers for many in the industry. Both sides are wielding their unique advantages, land for BC, sea for Alaska, in a high-stakes game of economic leverage. British Columbia's scenic ports and vibrant cities have long been a draw, while Alaska's breathtaking wilderness and adventure tourism are unmatched. Each region is fighting to protect its share of the lucrative cruise market. The tourism tug-of-war has broadened the conflict, threatening jobs and reshaping the flow of people and money across the Pacific Northwest. Workers, business owners, and entire communities now find themselves caught in the crossfire, uncertain about what the next season will bring. The outcome could redefine the region's economic landscape for years to come. The battle is no longer just about goods, it's about the future of an entire region's economy, the livelihoods of thousands, and the identity of the Pacific Northwest as a world-class destination. As both sides dig in, the outcome remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: the stakes have never been higher. British Columbia's toll threat is part of a coordinated Team Canada retaliation, with provinces uniting against U.S. tariffs. Yukon halted American liquor purchases and restricted U.S. companies from government contracts, while Ontario imposed a 25% surcharge on electricity exports. Prime Minister Trudeau's government announced retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, ensuring the pain would be felt across multiple industries. The strategy is clear: show national unity and make it costly for the U.S. to escalate. BC also ordered its liquor stores to stop selling alcohol from Republican-led states, including Alaska. Canada is signaling it's ready for a protracted economic conflict, using every available tool to defend its interests. At the core of the conflict is national sovereignty. Canada has full legal authority over its territory and highways. There's no treaty guaranteeing the U.S. toll-free access to Alaska through Canada. The Alaska Highways history doesn't override Canadian rights. The Economic Stabilization Act is a legal, if provocative, exercise of provincial power. Some restrictions are framed as environmental or indigenous protections, adding complexity to the dispute. But the timing of BC's toll threat makes its retaliatory intent clear. Canada's legal standing is firm, shifting the debate from law to politics and reciprocity. The message: access is a privilege, not a right, and it may now come with a steep price. Amid escalating threats, leaders on both sides publicly call for a diplomatic solution to avoid a damaging trade war. The future hinges on whether the U.S. imposes the 25% tariff. If so, BC will likely activate tolls, triggering a cycle of retaliation. The result could be economic chaos, disrupted supply chains, higher prices, and devastated industries. An off-ramp exists. If the White House withdraws the tariff threat, Canada's retaliatory measures could remain dormant. Business leaders and diplomats hope common sense will prevail over brinkmanship. The Alaska Access Showdown is a warning about the fragility of even the strongest alliances. The coming weeks will determine if the U.S. and Canada step back from the brink or tumble into a mutually destructive conflict.